My name is Eli Mercer, and the day an envelope showed up on my porch with a number that made my coffee go cold, I thought it was a joke. $50,000 fine stamped across a sheet that called a little earthen dam I'd built, unauthorized alteration. $50,000. For a pile of rocks I put up to stop my backyard becoming a swamp. I'm not a lawyer or a loudmouth. I used to wire houses for a living. I fix things with my hands. When our creek backed up year after year, when my dog Rascal and the kids' inflatable pool bobbed like little ships in the mud, I got tired of polite, "We'll look into it," replies from the Willow Ridge Association. I got tired of waiting for someone in a suit to notice what we lived with every spring. At first, Margot Vance, president of the HOA, sounded reasonable on the phone. "Mr. Mercer, that structure violates Section 7B, she said. "We're issuing a citation and a fine." Polite words, sharp meaning. The document she mailed had stamps that looked official and signatures that seemed decisive, but my neighbor Tom, a former city clerk, leaned over the paper and said, "This doesn't match other county forms." He pointed to a smudged stamp and an odd font. Little things piled up until the paper smelled wrong. Then the squeeze started. Notices, demands, threats of legal action. Cameras appeared, small black boxes on lamp posts, on porches, and they pointed like someone had trained them to wait for the exact moment you made a mistake. An inspector's report arrived citing visual obstruction and measurements that didn't add up. The tone was clinical, as if numbers could replace judgment. Each paper felt like someone building a case in secret, layer by layer. I started tracing the issue like I used to trace a wire. Tiny inconsistencies became a pattern. Rosa Patel, a friend who teaches engineering, came over with a clipboard and spent an afternoon measuring the spillway. "You reduced the flood risk, Eli," she said. "This is sound." Whoever wrote their report skipped the math. Her voice had that teacher's confidence, the kind that calms you and also makes you listen. Margot didn't back down. The HOA petitioned a court for an order demanding removal within 72 hours. The legal language was clean and cold. Immediate compliance required. Further penalties for noncompliance. That night, I sat on my porch and thought of Sue's little boy fishing by the spillway with a bent safety pin, of Rascal's cold nose, of my hands that had built so many fixes over the years. Choosing to fight meant a mountain of bills I couldn't afford. Choosing to remove meant inviting the next flood. I started getting visits that felt less like conversation and more like oversight. A man in a blazer came by to watch me work, folding his arms with an air of officialdom. "We're enforcing the covenants," he said. He sounded like a man who believed rules were an end in themselves. Neighbors stood on porches watching me lift stones I had set with my own hands. And when the last one came off, the spillway opened again like a wound that had been stitched and then unstitched. 3 days later, the storm showed up with a kind of wrath. Rain came heavy and steady. Driveways filled, garages took on water, and lawns turned into slow-moving rivers. Sue's garden washed away into furrows. Tom's basement filled with the kind of muck that swallows boxes and memories. I filmed what I could. A child's bicycle floating like a toy boat, a neighbor wading through knee-deep brown water. The only difference between this and the years before was that the thing we'd built to keep the worst out wasn't there anymore. That's when I stopped being quiet. I took photos. I saved every notice. I put Rose's measurements beside the HOA's report and played the door camera footage with timestamps. The so-called county seal on one paper looked off-center, and the ink wasn't the right shade. The phone number listed connected to a forwarding service. Little things, but patterns add up. I called a reporter at the county paper and told him everything. He asked questions I hadn't thought to ask about signatures and authorization, and then he came out and looked at the same mud and the same stamped paper I'd been holding. When the story ran, the neighborhood changed in a matter of days. The next HOA meeting looked like something else entirely. People brought printouts and questions. Reporters stood in the back with recorders. Margot tried to keep the tone steady until someone asked about the seal. She faltered. When asked why private homes had cameras pointed at them instead of common areas, she said it was for safety. The answer didn't land well. Tom stood up and read testimony that showed the seal hadn't been authorized. Sue's husband, who'd hauled sandbags and lost a shed, asked with a quiet rage why following the covenants mattered more than his life's work. A woman who had been silent for months walked to the front and said, "My attic smells like sewage every time it rains. I sleep with a lamp on." Voices layered into pressure. It wasn't violent. It was the slow force of being seen and heard. A week later, Margot resigned. Things changed beyond an apology. The county opened a review, and the HOA had to rewrite enforcement policies, caps on fines, transparent procedures, and rules about cameras aimed at private property. It wasn't perfect reform, but it made it harder to do things by whispers and vague authority. People who had enjoyed enforcing rules had to show their work. We rebuilt the dam the right way. Rosa drew plans. We filed permits, and a neighbor with a pickup full of tools organized volunteers. We laid stones with intention and planted native grasses along the banks. The finished thing looked better than what I'd cobbled together in a hurry. It had an engineer's care and a whole neighborhood's labor. We celebrated with a potluck, paper plates, potato salad, stories about who broke a shovel and who told a terrible joke. For the first time in months, neighbors talked without looking suspiciously sideways. I've thought a lot about how power hides in language. Community standards, we all agreed. The covenants, those phrases sound harmless until they're used to control people's lives. In small towns, people fight over status, control, petty slights. Sometimes that drives decisions that hurt others. Forging a document, pointing cameras at people's homes, those aren't mistakes, they're choices. There were moments when I felt small and moments when I felt proud. I cried when I took the dam down because I felt like I'd failed my family. I sweated through legal forms and worried about bills and the risk of court. But we also discovered that documenting what happened, showing screenshots and timestamps and eyewitness testimony, is a kind of armor. It turned our messy, local problem into a story that other people could see and that a newspaper could amplify. After Margot resigned, there was a ripple effect. A few board members stepped down, some apologized, and the HOA voted to open their minutes to residents for a period of time. The county encouraged mediation and offered a hotline for grievances. We also pushed for a modest relief fund to help neighbors who had lost property in the flood. It wasn't a fortune, but it helped Sue replace a few raised garden beds, and it let Tom clean out his basement and buy a new dehumidifier. Small things, but they mattered because in the end this was about people, not paperwork. I remember one evening, months after all the paperwork, walking down to the spillway with Rosa. We watched water move through the stones we'd placed, moving steady and honest. "You should have charged admission," she joked. I laughed because it felt like healing. The dam is just a little engineering fix, but it came to mean something else, that a neighborhood can choose to protect each other or choose to let rules protect power instead of people. If you think I made the wrong call, say so. If you think I should have folded and saved myself the trouble, say that too. I want to know what people think about how community power is used and whether safety should ever lose to procedure. Share, comment, tell your story. I'll read them all, and I promise to reply when I can.